The Legends of Payne Road by Anonymous. I hope someone can give me some insight or be entertained at the very least. I'm scared even typing this up because of what I've been reading tonight and what I remember from that night in question. Some parts of North Carolina have a road called Payne Road or Edwards Road. It's a very rural area that is said to be haunted. Well, my ex-girlfriend Angel and my best friend at the time Robert went to check it out. We wanted to see what was up because Robert's friend said that they stopped their car on the bridge and it wouldn't turn on, no matter how hard they tried. It's said to be haunted because Edward Payne killed all of his slaves, hung them from that bridge, and then proceeded to kill his family, all just to appease the devil. Well, it was about midnight on a summer night, about 84 degrees, when we decided to leave for Rural Hall. When we finally get there, we approach the sign for Edwards Road. I turn down the road and continue going for quite some time. It's pretty dangerous. There are no street lights on the road, and at one part of the road, it drops off entirely into a steep hill without warning. We get to the bridge, surrounded by fields that are just mud at this point, and we park right on it, turn the car off, sit still for just a minute, and, well, nothing. I turn it back on, and we keep going. This is BS, I said to my friends, but I still felt a tinge of fear for some reason. We keep going and stop at another section. My ex asks if she could drive. I say sure, why not? We drive back to said section and try it again. She does it, and the car won't start all of a sudden. I am 90% sure she's just freaking messing with me, but I'm starting to get a little scared, so I throw it neutral and push it off. It starts up, and we go. We return to the same bridge on another lap, and I get anxious. We stop about 100 feet away, and I look into the woods past the field. I notice there are green, blue, and red lights flickering all over, and then I notice disembodied shouting. It honestly sounded strange. I don't even know how to explain it, almost like people that were rabid like dogs almost. My paranoia level increased tenfold. It didn't help that there were old abandoned barns made out of logs every 1,000 feet down the road. I'm freaking out because I've had paranormal things happen when I was a kid, and my eyes are now watering because I'm getting PTSD flashbacks. Something needs to be corrected. I try to tell my friends, but they don't really listen. That's when I see the fog that creeps out of the woods. Not where the lights are coming from, but from about 2,000 feet down the road. This thick layer of fog began to descend on us. We get back in the car and drive around again. Again, I'm on edge, heart pounding, shaking. I know something's up. We drive the length of the road and again wind up at the bridge. This time we're about 20 feet away from this concrete bridge before going over the creek, and then here comes the fog. It comes creeping out of the woods around the other side of the bridge and forms a wall that cannot be seen through. This makes me freak out more. This is the part that truly starts to freak me out the most. A circle forms in the middle of the bridge. An absolute perfect circle about 3 feet wide. My ex starts to walk towards it. She walks towards it and I'm shaking. It's almost like she's in some sort of like trance. I know it's real now. I can't seem to speak. I can't seem to move. I was just so afraid. My friend Robert starts walking towards it, going after her, and I start following them, trying to get them both to stop. But I literally cannot seem to speak and my heart is pounding hard in my chest. In my head, I'm like screaming, please stop, but nothing was to come out. Robert finally says, maybe this isn't such a good idea. All I can do is nod, mouth wide open, and we all get back in the car. My ex was still driving, and we returned the way we came. We are driving along, and I begin to feel a lot better after we leave the place and put some distance between us. My ex grabs her phone, and it starts screaming, ringing, and making really weird demonic noises. She may be doing this, messing with us and all that stuff, but there was just something about the fear in her eyes that told me that she was not the culprit here. We drop her off, and at this point, I'm still on edge. I'm a bit better though, but jumpy. My friend Robert and I are at the driveway of his house just talking about everything before we call it a night. We did remember hearing what sounded like a thud toward the back of my car when we were driving away from the bridge, so we go back to see if there's any marks. We don't see any scratches, and we didn't see anything else out of the ordinary. But I'll never forget this night. It's a hard story to explain, but I hope that you all enjoyed it. I drive trucks for a living here in England. It was one of the only jobs I could pretty much just walk into after being medically discharged from the Army, the Royal Logistics Corps to be specific, with some intense back problems. I had tried physiotherapy, yoga, acupuncture, all sorts of things, but sitting in the cab of a military truck for so long had really done a number on my spine. It was horrible that I was basically forced into the same line of work, only in the civilian world. And I had no choice but to take a daily regime of strong pain medication just to make it through the days and nights of long-distance truck driving. But that is neither here nor there, I suppose. They had only been working for the company I'm with now for about 6 or 7 months, when I was driving down this lonely stretch of road just outside of Rotherham in South Yorkshire. There, I see this young woman at the side of the road, bags in hand with her thumb out like she was looking to hitchhike. It is not like I do not see a good few hitchhikers on my routes. They are much more common than you might expect, especially during the summer months when people can afford to be standing at the side of the road, sometimes for hours at a time, waiting for lifts. I never normally stop for people. I have seen enough horror movies to know that you are inviting trouble on yourself if you just let a total stranger into your truck for long distances. But there was something about this girl that had me slowing down and stopping at the roadside for her. I do not know if it was how young she was or how desperate she looked. She did not look like the kind of scruffy, hippie type, or dodgy cardboard sign holder that I normally see standing out there. So there I was, opening my cab door and helping her climb inside. I asked her where she was looking to go, only to have her reply something like, "Anywhere, just drive." This bothered me a little bit, I will be honest, as I did not really like the idea of having someone just sat in my passenger seat for the unforeseeable future. I'm not exactly the most sociable person, and awkward silences are annoying for me at the most, let alone when it's with some girl that is half my age. God knows what people would think if they saw me. Probably that I was some sort of perv or something. So I ask her again, only rephrasing the question so that I make it clear that I cannot just have her sitting in my truck for the foreseeable future, as I would be looking for somewhere to stay overnight at some point. I know it sounds a bit mean, but I did not want to have to properly look after this girl, paying for her food, paying for a hotel room and all that. I had never picked up a hitchhiker before, but they are usually set on certain places that you can just drop them off at, right? So after a bit of awkward silence, and I made it clear that I loathe those, I asked her why she was on the road. She did not give me, honestly, much of anything in the way of specifics, just that she was having trouble at home and needed to get away. I asked her if it was a fight with her parents or a boyfriend or something, and that maybe she should just not run away from her problems, but go back and fix whatever it was, like address the issue or whatever instead of just straight up avoiding it. But she immediately took issue with the fact that I had asked her about a potential boyfriend, saying she is getting out immediately, and if I had any funny ideas about where this was going, that made the whole thing feel even more awkward. And I reassured her that I did in fact have a long-term girlfriend at home, and that I certainly was not in the habit of picking up young girls from the side of the road. I am basically explaining that I'm not a perv when I see a police car pass us on the road. Nothing unusual, so it barely registers other than for me to make sure I am not over the speed limit or anything. The usual, I just saw a police car, anxieties. But a moment later, I hear sirens behind me, looking into the rear view to see what appeared to be the very same car, having turned around to follow me, with a view to pull me over. I groaned, saying something about hoping my brake lights are not out, something along those lines, and slowly beginning to pull my truck over to the side of the road. This is right when the girl in the passenger seat freaks out and starts pleading with me to not pull over. I mean, not just pleading, but she is begging, obviously getting really panicked at the idea of the police officer. Now, this made me feel bloody nervous. What had she done that made her nervous around the police? And how would that reflect on me if I were caught with her? These questions are whirling around my head, and I just tell her to calm down, that I had absolutely no other choice but to pull over. I was explaining further that I was hardly about to get into a high-speed police pursuit on account of a stranger. She burst into tears at that point, just sinking her head into her hands and weeping, but she does not try to run away. Nothing like that. So that sort of reassured me that she had not committed some sort of violent crime, or at least that she was not some hardened criminal on the run from the law. I watched the policeman that had pulled me over get out of his car and walk up to the side of my truck, which also happens to be the side that the girl sat on, as soon as he looks through the window. I hear him say something like, "Get out of the truck, Natalie." This obviously has me taken aback. Who the hell was that girl that the police officer were on bloody first name terms with her? She is crying and sobbing, but looks up at the window and screams no through the glass. The policeman mentions for me to unwind down my window, and I hesitate for a moment. The girl, this Natalie, is obviously terrified of being arrested or whatever is about to happen. The policeman then says something over his radio, something I did not catch because the glass is in the way. So to better hear what he's saying, I start winding down the window. It was too late to hear what he said on the radio, but I do hear what he said next. Your parents called again, Natalie. They're tired of you running away like this, and quite frankly, I'm tired of having to come fetch you every time this happens. I suppose I knew all I needed to know from that, but that's when I heard something weird. I looked on in a kind of grim fascination at what was unfolding. She was saying that they're not my parents. Why won't any of you understand that? The girl started to scream. Every time you drag me back there, they do worse and worse things to me and call it punishment. They say it's for my own good, but it's not. It's not at all. She turns to me, pulling her sleeve to show me all kinds of burns and scars up her arm. Ones that were so pronounced and gross that I recoiled in disgust and horror. Please, I am begging you, do not let them take me back. I'll do anything. Please just don't let them take me again. What was I supposed to do? Drive off with this girl and get chased by the police? She could have been mentally ill or something, severely delusional with a self-harm problem, and I'm just going to drive off with her in the middle of nowhere so she could run away from her home or something? Besides, I was terrified. Absolutely terrified. Police backup arrived, and when there was enough of them, they dragged the girl out of my truck kicking and screaming before they threw her in the back of a police car and drove away. I tried my best to get some of the police to explain to me what the hell had just happened, and I expected to get some sort of answer along the lines of my previous suspicions, but they just waved me away, told me it was none of my business, and that I should not have been picking up young women from the side of the road anyway. I still do not know what happened to that girl, and I hope she has gotten the treatment she needs. But part of me wonders if I had helped prolong some sort of horrible cycle of abuse, one which the actual police were complicit. Last night, my boyfriend and I were driving home from Universal Studios in Orlando. We were rerouted away home we had never gone before, and were traveling basically in the middle of nowhere. My boyfriend's speedometer is broken on his car, and he must press the button to reset the miles after he gets gas. This will be especially important soon. We were driving on a deserted road in the middle of absolute nowhere with not one car in sight. My boyfriend realized we hit the 130-mile mark on his odometer. That means we needed gas. But there was literally not one gas station in sight. I put the search in my phone for a gas station nearby, and we found one. It turned out to be closed. In a hurry, we found another gas station 5 minutes up the road. This is where the story truly gets weird. My boyfriend thought he closed his gas cap after he filled up, and we were once again driving along this deserted road. We heard a loud bang and realized he forgot to put the gas cap back on. So we are driving around this dark road looking for the gas cap. He finally pulls over and realizes somehow the gas cap is still attached to the car. We get back on track to the other gas station. Out of nowhere, I had a horrible thought about something going wrong at that gas station. I pushed it aside as best as I could, because I knew we needed gas and AAA is not an option where we were. We get to this gas station and the lights are kind of on. This road literally leads to a dead end with a gas station on it. The only way to leave this area was to turn left or go straight out of the gas station. My boyfriend got out of the car to see if we could get gas, and the feeling intensified. I have literally never felt like that in my entire life. My stomach dropped into my butt. I have been in very disturbing situations, such as almost being kidnapped twice, being followed home, watching someone being taken away in a body bag after being hit by a car, and even some paranormal situations. I can talk about this sometime in the future, but I have never, ever felt like this before. I saw a white car pulling up the road, and it looked like it was going to make a left. Keep in mind, there is literally no one on this road. He pulls up and notices my boyfriend, and comes back up with his windows down. I found this very strange because my boyfriend has a genuinely nice sports car, and my mind immediately went to panic mode. I started screaming his name, and the man realized that someone else was in the car. He turned left and sped off suddenly. Sadly, I did not get his license plate because of how dark it was. The situation frightens me more than you can even imagine. It may not seem too scary, but it was easily one of the most terrifying things to watch because I did not know if I was going to witness my boyfriend being robbed at gunpoint or something like that. The feeling and thought I just had 10 minutes earlier are what also made the situation even worse. We found a gas station with actual human life around, and we made it home safe and sound. Once I got home, my dad told me that that road we were driving on was famous for many bodies being found on it. I hope no one gets put in that situation. Be safe out there, my friends. Although what I'm about to tell you may sound like one of your run-of-the-mill horror movies, I swear the validity of it and what I saw. It all started on an extremely hot July day this past year. My car is almost 20 years old and sometimes overheats on hot days, just like this one. However, until I get a better paying job, it is the car I'm stuck with. This day I was driving through the back roads looking for a family of dog breeders a friend had told me about. I had been searching for the place for several hours and was approaching the warmest part of the day. As per usual, my car began overheating and I was forced to pull over. I picked up my phone to call my girlfriend only to see that my battery was dead. After I spent a couple of minutes cussing my luck, I acknowledged that I was going to have to find someone with a working phone. That was not going to be very easy, unfortunately, as I was out in the middle of nowhere. And, unfortunately, that was also not going to happen unless I started walking. Soon, I spotted an old farmhouse off in the distance and headed toward it. A trip that would have taken a half an hour on a normal day took almost an hour because of the oppressive heat. I had to take several breaks during the journey, but eventually made it. The area around the house looked more like a junkyard. Parts of old cars spread about, and I had to weave through a maze of them to try to reach the front door. I knocked on the door for several minutes but got no answer. Thinking maybe that the homeowner may be hard of hearing, I walked around and investigated the windows, hoping to see someone inside. At the side of the house, I spotted a telephone hanging on the wall just inside the kitchen. Now that I knew there was a phone there, I became excited and started calling out for someone. Even after walking all the way around, no reply came. I was about to give up until I saw a woman laying on a bed. I nearly banged on the window to try to get her attention, but I figured that may scare her, so I went back to the front door and let myself in. In hindsight, that was just as scary. Before I entered, however, I took a piece of paper from a notebook I carry with me and wrote out a note explaining what I was doing there. Even then, I called out several times as I approached the bedroom. Still no answer. I continued toward the room. The closer I got to the woman, the more her appearance began to unnerve me. She was lying flat on her back and staring blankly at the ceiling. I had initially believed she was watching the television that was turned on in the room with her, but her eyes sat completely still. Regardless, I got closer, and once I was within a few steps, I handed her the note. When the note touched her hand, she did not react. This caused me to get closer, and this is when I realized something was very wrong. Her face had a very dry, almost mummified look to it. Her hair was a vibrant black, a color not often seen on older females. She had to have known I was there by that point, but her eyes stayed fixated. This is what caused me to lean in even closer and look into her eyes. Rather than being slightly bloodshot or moist looking like most people's, they had a shiny, glassy appearance, like they were fake. Despite this, not until I touched her did I know for sure that she was dead. I realized that perhaps she was a mannequin rather than a human, so I reached down and touched her bare hand. The texture of her skin was dry, but stone cold to the touch. The oddity of this just beginning to really sink in when a loud creaking noise came from behind me. Without a second thought, I tore out of there and ran back down the road in the direction of my car. Within a half a mile, I ran into an older man in a truck, and he agreed to give me a ride into town. I said nothing about my experience to him, and any time he attempted to make small talk, I said as absolutely little as I could. He let me borrow his phone to call my girlfriend, and she agreed to meet us at a gas station on the edge of town. When he let me out there, I thanked him and he went on his way. Once I was safely inside my girlfriend's car, I borrowed her phone and called the police. I had not even told her about it yet, so the look of shock at her face as I described what I saw showed me what my expression likely was at the time when I discovered it. The cops said they would send a car out to the house to check out my claims. I called a record next to pick up my car. The police never called me back, so after waiting 3 days, I called to inquire about what they found. It took a few moments to find a person aware of my call, but once I did, the officer said that he and his partner searched the entire property and found nothing out of the ordinary, especially on a mummified woman. I thanked them and hung up. What happened after I fled, I can only guess. The noise behind me was probably the owner of the home, and he hid the woman's body, knowing that the cops were likely to be called. To tell you the truth, I am not sure what I saw in that house on that bed. I am positive that I saw a human laying on the bed, but that is all. More than once I have been tempted to grab a camera and return to the house to get proof of my claims, but fear of the unknown and what else could be waiting for me if I did has stopped me. If the nightmares of her soulless eyes continue, however, I may have no other choice. I started my career working in sawmills back in 2007. I was hired for a portable sawmill in southwest Washington state. This mill was located quite literally in the middle of a forest. It was constructed in the early 1970s, and even in the short 30 years of its life, it seemed to have a decent amount of history inside of it. I worked the weekend graveyard shift, 2:30 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. the following day, on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. I was a trim drop operator. I had a partner who I was with. We were the only two who worked in this area. His name is Pete. We would take turns rotating through the night. One of us would run the drop, where you would drop out bad boards, chunks of garbage, and just anything else that could not be made into quality lumber. The boards that would be left to be processed would enter a lugged, chained system, and then be pulled through a scanner, and then a trim box that would cut the lumber to length, and then take them to the next area, which was the sorter. The other of us would sit at an operator's console about 20 feet away and watch monitors that displayed various parts of the machine and process flow. We rotate every few thousand boards to keep from being fatigued. One night, I was running the drop, and Pete was kicked back at the console station reading away at the newspaper. Everything was just going normal as ever, when I glanced over and noticed him peering up at the monitor by the outfeed with a puzzled look on his face. He jumped up and went walking down to the trimmer saw box and looked around it. He also looked at the outfeed. He then walked back, looking quite concerned, sat down, shrugged, and started reading again. This happened a second time, and by now it had my attention. I threw up the skids to stop the flow of lumber and walked over to him and asked him what was up. There was a guy standing at the outfeed. I went down there to see what the hell was going on, and when I got there, he was gone, he said, with a confused look on his face. This did not make sense, because this was an area that was not accessible unless you stopped the machine and activate a catwalk that unfolded from the outfeed of the saw to allow access to a small platform on the opposite side of the machine as we operated from. I asked him to point out where the guy was hanging. Pete pointed to the platform, slightly frustrated. I shook my head at him and laughed, before running back to the drop to continue running lumber. Pete stayed fixed on the monitors now, newspaper folded up and thrown to the side. No more than 5 minutes go by before he jumps up and runs down to the saw box and outfeed again. This time, I threw the skids up and followed him. By the time we got there, there was nothing. He pointed across the lumber table, which was 30 feet wide, to the platform across the machine and yells, "Who's over there? You weren't allowed to be over here, god dang it." Both of us waited to see a man who had been on the monitor, but once again, there was nothing there. After a minute or two of looking, we decided to move back to our stations. I walked by the console station, glancing at the monitor, seeing nothing, and Pete followed shortly behind. By the time I made it to the drop to start running again, Pete howled. I snapped over and saw him stabbing the monitor with his finger. He yelled at me to come look. I ran over and investigated the monitor. Sure enough, there was a guy. He was standing on the small platform Pete had pointed out. The monitor is small, grainy, and black and white, but we can work out that this guy is wearing a tin hard hat, a very dirty and worn button-up long sleeve with the sleeves either rolled up or ripped off, and a very thick denim jeans of a dark color. He's just standing there, with his elbows on the handrail looking at the lumber from the saw box. "Wait here," Pete yelled as he stealthily snuck down to the outfeed. As he closed in on the outfeed area, to catch this guy red-handed for being in an area you cannot or should not be able to access while in operation, I looked back and forth at Pete in the monitor. About the time Pete made it to the saw box, the man on the monitor looked up into the camera and literally just faded away. I completely lost my cool. I felt a cold chill run down my back, accompanied by all the hairs on my arms standing up. I sprinted as quickly as I could to Pete, exclaiming, "That ain't a guy. It's no guy." Pete just stood there dumbfounded. Both of us knew that we were looking at an empty platform, and we had no idea what we should do. We were quite disturbed now. Pete crossed his arms in thought before deciding we should call our foreman down to tell him this story. We walked back to the operator station and Pete grabbed the mic of the radio and called for the foreman. We ran operations until he arrived, both of us ready to bolt for the sawbox in case we saw the entity again. The foreman showed up about 5 minutes or so later, and we stopped running and explained what had happened. The foreman did not look impressed, but he was smiling. He explained that we had probably just seen one of the old-timers. Back in the late 70s, we had a man who worked here who ran the chip bin station, and one day, arrogance got the best of him. Long story short, he got buried in a chip pile and was crushed and suffocated before he could get dug out. As homage to his previous career as a logger in the woods, people think that his ghost roams these halls. Other operators have had occurrences where they have witnessed this entity wandering around different machines, seemingly just watching the flow of lumber. A few months back, one of my friends had opened up to me about a creature he said he encountered 2 times around New Jersey, where my mother lives. This same friend and I have encountered a skinwalker in the past while being in New Jersey, and he told me when he was just a boy, he saw something in the fields next to his house out in the middle of nowhere. Whatever he saw still terrifies him to this day. He has had 2 encounters with this so-called creature, one in the middle of the day, when he was a boy, and one while waking up in the middle of the night. Here are his encounters with an alleged dogman. These stories are also from his perspective, so I could capture the narrative. I hope you enjoy his stories. Hi, my name is Todd, and I have lived in New Jersey all of my life. Since I was a kid, I had all sorts of paranormal and creature experiences, which I can also tell here in the feature at some point. I'm a heavy believer in the supernatural and in dogman and other cryptids, just like my friend Sam. Here are 2 of my encounters with what I believe are dogman. It was a clear sunny day as I was walking alongside a trail that was close to my house. I was only around 7 or 8 years old at the time. It was so beautiful out that day, and as a young kid, I was taking it all in. I was having an absolute adventure, picturing myself just running through the open fields waiting for my mom and dad to get home. The trail I was on has beautiful scenery all around, with tall grass for miles. To my left, there was a dense forest to my right. I just was walking through the woods, as whenever my parents were not home, I would just explore. I was enjoying the walk, taking in all the feels of the nature. The smell of the wood was intoxicating, as well as the chirping birds. Then the woods fell silent. I felt like someone or something was watching me, and my eyes darted around the entire area. I then looked to my left and noticed something in the tall grass. To me, it looked like a big dog, but then I saw that it was crouched down like a man would be if it were hiding. It was covered in brown fur. It looked like it had a muzzle and ears like a German shepherd, and had eyes that were blood red. I thought it was more curious than frightening at the moment, but I was still on edge. I was scared for a bit, but I acted like I did not notice it and just went along my day and ran back to my house. I never really spoke about this encounter with anyone of my family, as they would probably think that I was crazy, but that was my first encounter with what I think was a dogman. The second encounter only happened about 4 or 5 years ago if my memory serves me correctly. At this point in time, I lived in a different house. The house was close to a large forest, and the biggest predators I have seen around here were either coyotes or foxes. Now, what I saw that night was no coyote. I woke up in the middle of the night with my throat dry, and realized I was thirsty. I went to the kitchen to get some water, when I felt the sudden sense of dread, and felt like I was being watched. I investigated the window close to where I was, and to my shock and horror, I saw this huge animal in my backyard. Whatever it was had noticed me, and it was staring at me with these crimson red eyes. I felt utterly terrified, and to my horror, I saw the animal bare its teeth at me and stand up on two legs. This creature then started growling, and I could hear it as my window was open slightly. I also saw its breath come out of its mouth, and I realized this thing was a real animal. It looked to be about 7 or 8 feet tall on both legs, with the head of a German shepherd, and a body shaped just like a bodybuilder. Whatever this thing was, then looked at my fence in my yard, ran to it, and jumped across it into the woods below. I went back to my bed, terrified and could not sleep for the rest of that night. These 2 encounters with these beings have shook me to the core, and made me realize that there are creatures that science refuses to recognize out there. Be safe, be careful, and be sure to never explore the woods without being armed in some manner. The Shack in Kensington by Anonymous. This story takes place about 5 years ago. I was 18 at the time, just got my license, and wanted to explore. My friends and I would spend weekends exploring the area's abandoned or supposedly haunted buildings. We were thrill seekers, and doing this in a rural location was exciting. Being in the middle of nowhere was thrilling to us. I told my uncle about some of the adventures my friends and I would go on, and he told me that when he was my age, he did similar things with his friends. He described a small shack on Kensington Road in Michigan, about 40 minutes from my house. He stated when he was younger, he and his friend heard all kinds of rumors about a cult that would inhabit the grounds and do rituals with blood and goat carcasses. This sounds like a fake cult story, but it did pique our interest. One night, they drove to Kensington in hopes of something exciting happening. And they got just that. As they arrived, a man came out to the street with a shotgun and scared them away. As they sped down the dirt road, a deer ran in front of them a little ways down the street, and they flipped their car into a ditch, trying to avoid it. Police came and investigated. The man with the shotgun was just a squatter. A few months passed, and my uncle noticed something on Crime Stoppers. The man who came out to the edge of the road, who was apparently murdered, and his killer was not known at the moment. The incident made my uncle and his friends not want to go anywhere near that place again. Well, this story interested me. The following weekend, I told my friends about this story, and we decided we wanted to see this shack for ourselves, and it wasn't even that far away. I typed in Kensington Road on my Apple Maps app and a few other vital things my uncle said that were close to it. I found the location, and my friends and I set out for an adventure on a Saturday night. The directions took a lot of work to follow. The closer we got to the destination, the fewer cars we saw until there was no other traffic at all. There were just deserted cornfields on both sides of us as far as the eye could see. The paved road we were driving on approached a T intersection with a paved road going to the left and a dirt road going to the right. This was as far as the GPS would take us. Kensington Road was just ahead, not left or right, but straight ahead. The road was dirt, not even shown as a road on any of the maps. We drove on this dirt road for about 3 minutes before we located the shack. It was a small building, nothing impressive, tiny, slightly larger than a shed. There was no mailbox for this place and no address on the house. The windows were boarded up with wood, and they looked almost uninhabited. We didn't know what we would find, as my uncle had visited the place probably 10 years prior, and it had been a long time since then. The place still gave us the creeps. Perhaps it was because of the boarded-up windows and the absolute lack of life in its surroundings. We pulled over to the side of the road in front of the shack, all afraid to get out and explore. We rolled the windows down and turned the car off to see if we could hear anything. I swear to you, we heard chanting, like a repetition of words being said. However, we were having trouble discerning what was actually being said or if it was even in English. This gave us absolute chills, but we continued to see what else we could hear. Beneath the chanting, an extremely old broadcast was being played. It sounded something straight out of a World War II era radio program. The location and sounds were enough to give us goosebumps, and we left with chills. Now, it doesn't end there. We returned about a week later to hear the same old broadcast playing, and nothing else happening. It was such a mysterious location. A few weeks had passed and we decided we want to check it out again to see if the thing was still playing. We headed there, feeling more confident now that we weren't surrounded by darkness. We parked the car on the side of the dirt road again, got out, and approached the shack. A friend of mine went around back while I held my ear to the window, trying to see if I could hear anyone inside. As we were investigating, a car drove by. This was strange, mind you. This shack was in the middle of nowhere on a dirt road, very far away from any other houses. We brushed it off and continued investigating. Not even a minute later, my friend came around and told me what the heck, and we needed to get out of there quickly. He said that same exact vehicle that drove by from the opposite direction was now coming back. We started to grow more cautious, and again the car circled back around and drove right past us, never really looking at us, but just kept going around. This was enough to finally get us to snap into our right minds. We ran back to the car and drove out of there. We turned to the next available street and, to our surprise, the exact vehicle was now following behind us very closely. We were terrified. We made random turns everywhere we could to try to lose them, but we just couldn't seem to shake them. They followed behind us for at least an hour, but it was probably only 10 minutes because everything felt like it slowed down in that moment. Eventually they backed off. It'd definitely be quite some time before we ever decided to talk about the shack in Kensington, let alone ever return there. And if we do ever return there, I'll tell you this, I'm bringing an actual weapon, more than just a stick or a sword, I'll tell you that.